We've talked a lot about this NFL draft class from the Indianapolis Colts, specifically the defensive side. We covered Jalen Simpson, Jalen Carley's, Leatu Latu, obviously. But there's one pick that I have loved from the beginning. If you've watched for any amount of time, you know how much that I think this player is going to be an absolute draft steal. And more people are starting to catch on to this idea, and that is Micah Abraham. Now, Micah Abraham was kind of a surprising pick for the Indianapolis Colts, a team that drafts specifically based on RAS usually. But this draft was different. They didn't seem to go as hard for relative athletic scores as they have in the past. In fact, it definitely seems as though they went off of not only best available, but they went off of guys who would fit their weaknesses. And Micah Abraham is no exception. Micah Abraham is a guy who's out of Marshall and whose relative athletic score is relatively abysmal. His RAS score is a 3.70. Now, again, this is a team who in the years past had an average RAS score of 9.93. So to go from a 9.93 average to 3.70 should show you that the Colts saw something in Micah Abraham that should surprise you. Now, one thing that's interesting is that the three picks in the later rounds, all of them changed positions. Jalen Simpson switched from cornerback to safety, and then Jalen Carley's switched from cornerback safety to linebacker. The only one who stayed the same was Micah Abraham, who stayed at cornerback. He was picked in round 6, number 201 in the draft class, and he scored a 3.70 with below average height, below average weight, below average bench, below average. He had very poor vertical, very poor broad jump, and this is where he excelled. He had a 4.43 40-yard dash, and then he had a poor shuttle and a poor three cone. So why did the Colts draft him? Why did the Colts go from a team that generally tries to get a guy who is a 9.93 or higher on the RAS, and we talked about Jalen Carley's in the last video, why did they go for a guy like Micah Abraham? And the answer is simple. I can't show film on YouTube without them taking my video down. But if you watch any film on this guy out of Marshall, even from Marshall, a school that doesn't face an incredible amount of competition or tough competition, you see this guy's got potential in specifically press man coverage. Now, this was an area where the Colts struggled. Kenny Moore was pretty much the lone highlight of the Colts in press coverage. Now, the Colts typically run a cover three, which means that they're running three deep safeties and everyone else is in the middle. Typically, that's where Kenny Moore thrives, is to be in that middle zone while three guys go deep. Last year, it was Rodney Thomas and Julian Blackman, Julian Blackman, and Juju Brents. Some other guys were in the back there, but that was typically the scheme. And then let your linebackers kind of cover the middle, Kenny Moore on the outside. And that was kind of the norm for the Indianapolis Colts. And in fact, a lot of teams are adapting and going back to that model because of the need for the passing game growing more and more every single year. So why did the Colts draft a guy like this? And I think that it is to fix the mistakes on the inside. The Colts got blown up deep quite a bit of times. So a guy like this, it definitely seems as though the Colts went for speed and the ability to play press coverage above almost anything else when drafting defensive backs this year. Both Jalen Simpson and Jalen Carley's both had an incredible speed for their position and really good press coverage. Jalen Simpson being one that I think is going to be really, really good and going to have his name in the mix for the free safety position because of his ability and his pursuit and his ability to catch the ball or his ability to spot the ball and really see the play before it happens. But Micah Abraham has the ability, I think, to be able to really press in tight and be able to make plays. I think what the Colts got here in round 6 is a guy who's going to be really, really, really tough to throw against. One thing that's important for cornerback metrics is the opposing quarterback completion percentage when throwing to that guy. Now it's really a tough thing to metric because so many variables go in, right? Like you have the wide receiver running the correct route, the wide receiver being in the right place, the quarterback's throw, the quarterback's pressure. All of these things come into factor. But one thing that's interesting is that Micah Abraham had a really, really, really elite ability to limit the amount of completions thrown in his vicinity. his stats were really good in last season. In fact, he had several passes deflected that should have been interceptions that would have that were ended up being intercepted by his own team. But he has the ability to go inside and play nickel is important. That gives him some flexibility. So go in and out gives him some real value and gives him a chance to actually compete and make the roster. 12 picks in his college career, 12 picks, and that's not easy. So he's got a natural instinct and ball skills. This report comes from Zach Hicks over at Horseshoe Huddle. But the skill set is there, and this is what he goes on to say, and I'll show this right here. The skill set is there. The Colts cornerback room is a major work in progress. With the only guaranteed players to make the team, Kenny Moore, Juju Brents, Jalen Jones, and Dallas Flowers. 2 of those 4 locks played fewer than 10 games last year for the team. A skilled, versatile player like Abraham could be the exact archetype that this unit needs in this upcoming season. His long speed is among the best in the secondary, and his ability to play at both nickel, cornerback, and on the outside is something that other players on the roster are lacking at the moment, aside from Kenny Moore. While Abraham's speed and versatility will be key, and the main separator for him this offseason could be his ball skills. The Colts cornerback room finished with just 23 pass breakups and 5 interceptions in 262 targets last season. For comparison, Abraham just wrapped up his senior season at Marshall with 4 interceptions and 11 pass breakups, only 63 targets thrown his way. That is what I think the Colts are missing and what the Colts are going to really, really rely on come this season. Because, like this report says, the Colts were one of the worst teams in the league as far as pass deflections, pass defense. And a lot of it had to do with pressure. And the Colts spent a lot of time addressing this and trying to fix the pressure. They spent a significant amount of their energy in the offseason, in fact, almost exclusively focusing on that defensive line. From taking the 5th-year option on Kwity Paye, which might not seem like a big deal, but I think when you're paying a guy $13.5 million, it's a big deal. Then you sign Roquan Davis. Then you re-signed DeForest Buckner. Then you re-signed Grover Stewart. DeForest Buckner was an extension. And then you spend your first pick in the draft. When there are so many holes in the team, you spend it on your defensive line. I think that shows that the Colts are valuing the pressure. But then they spent wide receiver, offensive line, and then the last 3 picks in the draft, where Chris Ballard has openly said that this year had such a deep cornerback and defensive back draft class that he spent the last 3 picks in the draft going after defensive backs. And then Anthony Gould, obviously, towards the end. But I think it's really important to note that the Colts wasn't by happenstance. I think they got the guys they wanted. They just didn't have to reach for them. I think this is going to be a really, really good thing for the Colts. And I think Abraham is going to have the ability to make the starting roster, but also to be incredibly lethal. I mean, this is a team that is going to face quite a bit of older wide receivers. You've got in the Gabe Davis is an old, but then you've got the Tennessee Titans who have DeAndre Hopkins, who have Calvin Ridley now. Then you go to the Houston Texans, who now have Stephon Diggs, who is an incredible route runner. So to have a guy who can play press coverage, or even to have a guy who can cover some other guys while Kenny Moore is playing those press guys, I think is going to be really, really important and going to be fundamental in the Colts being able to have a successful season, make the postseason again, and hopefully go deep into the playoffs.